The flashing red and blue lights sliced through the humid Florida night, reflecting off Ashley Huff's terrified eyes. The air hung heavy with the scent of exhaust and impending doom, even though, at that moment, she had no idea what she'd done wrong. Ashley, a 23-year-old working 2 part-time jobs to make ends meet, was always the cautious one. She followed the rules, paid her taxes, and never even had a parking ticket. This Thursday night felt no different, until it did. It began as any routine traffic stop. A broken taillight, a standard request for her friends, the drivers, registration, and insurance, the kind of interaction that happens hundreds of times a day across America. Mundane and almost forgettable. Except this one would become etched in Ashley's memory forever. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She'd never been in trouble with the law. Why were the officers looking at her so intently? She'd been riding in the passenger seat, quietly scrolling through her phone. She answered their questions politely, her voice trembling slightly, trying to project an air of calm she didn't feel. "Ma'am, is there anything in the vehicle we should know about?" Officer Miller's voice was firm, but not overtly aggressive. Ashley shook her head, a knot forming in her stomach. "No, sir. Nothing at all." Officer Miller and his partner exchanged a look, a subtle communication that Ashley couldn't decipher, but that sent a shiver of unease down her spine. Officer Miller had seen this before, the nervous fidgeting, the averted gaze. It was textbook. His training, honed over years on the force, told him this was a likely drug stop. He had a duty to investigate, a responsibility to keep the streets safe. He asked Ashley to step out of the car. The plastic bag, tucked under the passenger seat, had her name scrawled across it in faded marker, a remnant from a grocery trip weeks ago. Inside, a single metal spoon. A thin, crusty film clung to its surface, a clear, crystalline substance that, to Officer Miller, with his years of experience and countless drug busts, screamed methamphetamine. Ashley's eyes widened in disbelief as he held it up, the streetlight glinting off the metal. What is that?" she stammered. "Looks like we have a problem, ma'am," Officer Miller said, his voice now devoid of any warmth. He didn't ask, he told. Ashley watched, bewildered, as the officer carefully scraped a small sample of the residue onto a small, plastic field testing kit. The liquid within the kit began to change, swirling and shifting until it settled on a vibrant, unmistakable blue. "Positive," he declared, his voice flat and official, the word hanging in the air like a death sentence. Ashley's world tilted on its axis. Her breath hitched in her throat. "Positive? For what? That's not possible." "Ma'am, you're under arrest for possession of a controlled substance," Officer Miller stated, his partner already moving to restrain her. But it's SpaghettiOs," Ashley cried out, her voice rising in panic. "I had it for lunch. It's just the sauce. Please, just test it properly." Officer Miller scoffed, shaking his head. "SpaghettiOs? Lady, you expect us to believe that? Save it for the judge." Ashley felt a wave of nausea wash over her. The fight drained out of her, replaced by a chilling sense of helplessness. She knew, with a sickening certainty, that she was being swept away by a current she couldn't control. The cold steel of the handcuffs bit into her wrists, a harsh, metallic reality replacing the abstract fear. The harsh fluorescent lights of the Gainesville police station buzzed overhead, casting long, distorted shadows. Each step, the fingerprinting, the mugshot, the degrading strip search, where she was forced to remove every piece of clothing under the watchful eye of a female officer, felt like a violation, stripping away not only her clothes, but her dignity and her identity. The clanging of cell doors, the echoing shouts of other inmates, the smell of stale sweat and despair, it was a sensory overload, a nightmare she couldn't wake up from. Her one phone call, a precious lifeline in the overwhelming sea of despair, was to her mother. Her voice cracked as she tried to explain, the words catching in her throat, choked by sobs. Mom, they think I had drugs. They found a spoon. They say it's meth. But it's not, Mom. It's just SpaghettiOs, I swear. I had it for lunch. I swear." Her mother's voice, usually a source of comfort, was filled with a mixture of fear and disbelief. "Ashley, honey, what are you talking about? SpaghettiOs? Are you sure?" The uncertainty in her mother's tone was another blow, a crack in the foundation of Ashley's already crumbling world. The days that followed blurred together in a haze of stale air, echoing shouts, and the constant, gnawing fear that ate away at her insides. She shared a cramped cell with women facing far more serious charges, hardened criminals, some of them, with stories that made Ashley's blood run cold. Sleep was a luxury she couldn't afford, her mind racing with the injustice of it all, replaying the events of that night over and over, searching for some detail she'd missed, some way she could have prevented this catastrophe. The food was barely edible, the thin mattress offered little comfort, and the constant surveillance, the lack of privacy, was a constant reminder of her loss of freedom. But the worst part was the waiting, the agonizing uncertainty of not knowing what would happen next. The notice of her initial court date, a flimsy piece of paper that held her fate in its few lines, was apparently lost in the jail's internal mail system, a bureaucratic black hole that swallowed important documents whole. She had no idea she was supposed to appear before a judge until it was too late, until a guard informed her, with a shrug of indifference, that she'd missed her hearing and would remain in custody. This seemingly minor error, this misplaced piece of paper, compounded her nightmare, extending her stay in this purgatory. Her court-appointed lawyer, Mr. Henderson, a man who seemed perpetually exhausted and overwhelmed, finally visited her after her second missed court date. He urged her to take a plea deal. "It's the fastest way out, Ashley," he explained, his voice weary, his eyes reflecting the countless similar cases he'd handled, the countless lives ground down by the system. "The DA is offering a reduced charge, probation, no jail time. Even if you're innocent, fighting it could take months, maybe years, and the outcome is uncertain. You could end up with a felony conviction, a criminal record that will follow you for the rest of your life." He wasn't unkind, but he was pragmatic, a realist in a world where ideals often crumbled under the weight of procedure. Ashley stared at the concrete wall of the small, windowless interview room, tracing the cracks with her finger. Was it worth it? Was it worth fighting a system that seemed determined to crush her, to label her a criminal, regardless of the truth? The thought of pleading guilty to something she didn't do, of admitting to a crime she hadn't committed, felt like a betrayal of her own soul, a surrender to the injustice. But the alternative, the prospect of months, possibly years, languishing in jail, her life on hold, her future uncertain, was terrifying. She spent sleepless nights wrestling with the decision, her mind a battlefield of conflicting emotions. Fear, anger, resentment, and a flicker of stubborn defiance warred within her. She thought of her mother, of her jobs, of the life she'd been building, however modest it might be. It was all slipping away, dissolving like sugar in water, all because of a spoonful of SpaghettiOs. The sheer absurdity of it would have been comical, if it weren't so devastating. Meanwhile, back in the sterile, impersonal environment of the state crime lab, a technician, Sarah Chun, was methodically working her way through a backlog of evidence. She picked up a sealed plastic bag, labeled with Ashley Huff's name and case number. Inside, the metal spoon, its infamous residue now dried and flaking. She followed the standard procedure, carefully scraping a sample and subjecting it to a battery of sophisticated tests, gas chromatography, mass spectrometry, tests far more precise and reliable than the quick field test that had condemned Ashley. The results appeared on her computer screen, clear and unambiguous. She double-checked, then triple-checked, a slight frown creasing her forehead. The email from the crime lab arrived without fanfare at the prosecutor's office, a single attachment containing the definitive analysis, substance identified, tomato sauce residue. No controlled substances detected. The words, stark and simple, held the power to undo weeks of suffering, to restore a life that had been unjustly interrupted. Ashley was released as quickly and unceremoniously as she'd been arrested. No apology, no explanation, just a curt dismissal from a bored-looking clerk and a bus ticket back to her apartment, a life that had been irrevocably altered. The world outside the jail seemed brighter, the air fresher, but the joy of freedom was tempered by a deep, lingering sense of injustice and the heavy weight of trauma. She walked slowly, her legs feeling unsteady, her mind still reeling from the ordeal. She found herself jumping at shadows, her heart racing at the sight of a police car, the flashing lights triggering a wave of panic that washed over her, leaving her breathless and trembling. The simple act of eating SpaghettiOs, once a childhood comfort food, now brought back a flood of unwelcome memories. The taste of tomato sauce now mingled with the bitter taste of injustice. She considered suing, seeking some measure of justice, some compensation for the weeks stolen from her, for the damage to her reputation, for the emotional scars that would likely linger for years to come. But the thought of facing the system again, of reliving the trauma, of exposing herself to the scrutiny and the doubt, was almost unbearable. The legal battle would be long and arduous, and the outcome uncertain. And even if she won, could any amount of money truly compensate for what she lost? Ashley Huff's story is not unique, sadly not an isolated incident. It's a stark reminder of the fragility of justice, the ease with which an innocent person can be caught in the gears of a flawed system, a system that often prioritizes efficiency and expediency over accuracy and fairness. It highlights the inherent flaws in relying on quick, presumptive field tests, the immense pressure on defendants to plead guilty, even when innocent, and the dehumanizing effects of a criminal justice system that often treats individuals as statistics, rather than as human beings. It's a call for reform, for accountability, and for a renewed commitment to the fundamental principle of the presumption of innocence, a principle that, in Ashley's case, was tragically and almost comically ignored, all because of a spoonful of leftover lunch. The question remains, how many other SpaghettiOs cases are out there, hidden in the shadows of the system, waiting to be brought to light?